Welcome back to the second video here on Flexbox within CSS, in which my first video I kind of gave an overview and some basic terminology on Flexbox that I'm not going to recover here. So if you're unfamiliar with what Flexbox is or some of the basic terminology, that would be good to start with and then come to this video. But today we're going to discuss the Flex container, or the main kind of parent wrapper to your Flexbox. And we're specifically going to cover different properties that you can set on that container to change the behavior of your Flexbox. Okay, so this is going to be like setting the display, the flex direction, flex wrap, flex flow, and different properties like that. All right. And then in my next video on this Flexbox series, we're then going to cover the properties for the children or the flex items. Okay, so just to remind you, the Flex container is going to be kind of your wrapper around your Flex items. So in this depiction here, you can see that the container is kind of spaces this purple background here. And then the items are these three elements within the container. Okay, so today, all the properties that apply to just the container. And then in my next video, the properties for the items themselves. All right, so first off, you can set your container here to display flex, and this will define a flex container, and it will enable a flex context for all of its children. So to make a element a container or a flex container, you need to set display flex on that element. All right. Now, following that up, maybe the next most popular property that you will set on your container is going to be your flex direction. So this establishes the main axis, defining the direction flex items are placed within your flex container. Flexbox is a single direction layout, so it either goes from horizontal left to right, or it goes from right to left, or top to bottom, or bottom to top. It is just a single direction. And think of flex items as primarily laying out either in horizontal rows or vertical columns. So the available properties or the available values that you can set on this property are going to be row. So this is the default value for your flex direction. So if you don't set your flex direction, it's going to default to just row. It's going to stack your flex items horizontally from left to right. Okay, that is the default behavior. So this would be your default row right here, just from left to right. And then you could also do row reverse, which is also horizontal, but it's going to be right to left here. And then you could also do column. So flex direction column would be, instead of stacking your flex items from in a horizontal row from left to right or from right to left, it would actually stack them in a column from top to bottom, just like you can see here. Now you can also do column reverse, which would stack them from bottom to top. All right. So using flex direction, you can stack your flex items either from left to right horizontally, from right to left, top to bottom, or from bottom to top. And you can do that using the values of row, row reverse, column, and column reverse. And it defaults to just a left to right horizontal row. Next up, you can set the flex wrap property. And as this says here, by default, flex items will all try to fit into one line. You can change that and allow the items to wrap as needed with this property. So if you have several items here, the default behavior is for these several items all to try to fit onto one line. However, you could set this flex wrap property to allow them to wrap onto the following line. So first off, you can set this flex wrap property to no wrap. That is the default. All items in your Flexbox will be fit into one line. Next up, you can set your flex wrap property to wrap, and that's going to be flex items are going to wrap into multiple lines from top to bottom. So if you still have your flex direction as just your normal default row here, it's still going to stack them from left to right in a horizontal row, but it is going to wrap those once it fills up the entire space. And then you can also do wrap reverse. Flex items will wrap onto multiple lines from bottom to top. Now, the next property that you can set is flex flow, and this is shorthand for flex direction and flex wrap, in which together they can define the flex container's main and cross axes. Axes. The default value is row, no wrap. So here you can use flex flow, and that allows you to set your flex direction and your flex wrap all in one property. So here they can set it as column wrap. So it's going to set the flex direction as column, and it's going to allow those to wrap onto the next line. Or you can also set it to row reverse and no wrap. So it's going to be a horizontal row. It's not going to allow them to wrap, and it's going to be in a right to left ordering there. Okay, so flex flow is just shorthand for setting flex direction and flex wrap all in one property. And then following that, you can now get into kind of justifying your content with the justify content property. So this defines the alignment along the main axis. It helps distribute free space left over when either all the flex items on a line are inflexible or are flexible but have reached their maximum size. It also exerts some control over alignment of items when they overflow the line. So you have several different available properties here. For one, you have flex start. This is the default. Items are packed towards the start of your flex direction. So this is what that would look like right here. When I set my items to flex start, they're all stacked towards the start of my main axis here. If you set your flex direction to column here, they would all be stacked towards the top. And if it was, in this example, if you had it set as row reverse, it would stack all these to the right side because you would order them from right to left. And I just realized I think I have like some protein powder left on my shirt here. You're just going to have to ignore that. I tried to get it off, but I couldn't. So we'll just have to move on. Yes, I'm kind of a bro. I like lifting weights, and I get protein powder on my shirts occasionally. But it's my birthday today, so you got to let that one slide. All right. So that is flex start, stacks them all towards the start. And then as you can see, you can also set the justify content to flex end. And it does the opposite of flex start. It's going to stack all of your items to the end of your main axis. And then you have center. So justify content center. It places them all in the middle of your main axis. Okay. So those are all pretty self-explanatory: flex start, flex end, and flex center. But we also have a few different properties here. So space between here, which items are evenly distributed in the line. First item is on the start of the line. Last item is on the end of the line. So it's going to space these evenly, but it's going to make sure that your first item is right at the start of your main axis, and the last item is right at the end of the main axis. Okay. And then you have space around, in which items are evenly distributed in the line with equal space around them. Note that visually, the spaces aren't equal since all items have equal space on both sides. The first item will have 1 unit of space against the container edge, but 2 units of space between the next item because the next item has its own space that applies. So if we go and look at the space around example, what you can see here is that they have like 1 unit of space between the first item and the start of the main axis here. Same thing with the end of the main axis and the last item. But you see how they have a little bit more space between the middle item here, as well as kind of the first and third item. That is because we have 1 unit to the left here, and then this item has 1 unit to the right, and then this item also has 1 unit to the left. So they have a little bit more spacing compared to the just at the start and end. Okay, so it's kind of doubling up the units there since the center item has a unit as well as the first and third items. Okay, so that is space around. You can see it's just a little different than space between here. And then you also have space evenly, in which items are distributed so that the spacing between any 2 items is equal. And this includes the edges as well. So here, space evenly, it has the same space at the start, end, and between the items here. And I feel like I tend to use space evenly the most often when I want some space between all of my items here, but there could definitely be some use cases for space around as well. Now you can also use left and right here, but that's going to be pretty dang similar to flex start and flex end. All right. And I think that by using flex start, end, center, space between, space around, and space evenly, that's pretty much going to cover almost all of your use cases. All right. Next up, we have align items. So this defines the default behavior for how flex items are laid out along the cross axis. So remember that the cross axis runs perpendicular to your main axis. So if you have your flex direction to row, your main axis is going to go left to right across your row, and the cross axis is going to go from top to bottom. So this is saying how items should be laid out across this like perpendicular axis here. And you have a handful of values that you can set for your align items property as well. For one, you can do stretch, and that's going to make the items stretch to fill your entire container here. So they stretch to fill up your entire cross axis. Now you also have flex start, and you can see that's kind of included with start, self start, and those other couple of values there. And it said the difference between these are subtle, but more or less kind of get you to the same result. So I would just try to remember flex start. And I think that'll cover most of your use cases here. So flex start is going to place your items at the start of the cross axis. So here, right at the top of your container. And then you can see flex end is going to be the opposite of that. It's going to put them right at the end of your cross axis, so right at the bottom. Flex center is going to put them all in the middle of your cross axis here. So cross axis in this example is going to be from top to bottom. So it's going to place them all right in the middle there. And then you also have baseline, in which items are aligned such as their baselines align. So if you look at this one, you can see that if they all had like text here in the flex items, it would align them so the very bottom of the text gets aligned among all those items. All right. So align items, this will align your content along your cross axis, and you can use flex start, flex end, and flex center to be at the start, end, and center of your cross axis. Stretch will fill the entire container along your cross axis. And then baseline, if you have some text or something, it will make sure all the text, the like bottom of that text, is all starting at the same baseline. And then we also have align content here. This aligns a flex container's lines within when there is extra space in the cross axis, similar to how justify content aligns individual items within the main axis. So here you have several different values for this as well. And you can see flex start will place all these items towards the top of your cross axis. Flex end kind of scrunches all of your items down towards the bottom of that axis. Center is going to be right in the middle of your cross axis. Stretch is going to make sure that they all fill up all the space of your cross axis. Space between is going to evenly space them across, with your top row and your bottom row touching the top edge and bottom edge of your cross axis. And then space around is going to leave a little bit of space around your top and bottom rows, as you can see in these examples here. And then you could also use space evenly as well. So items are distributed evenly with equal space on each side. Very similar to what you would do with justify content here in these examples. But this is basically how you are going to align different rows within your cross axis. So you can also set the gap, row gap, and column gap properties to basically give some margin between your items. So here it explicitly controls the space between flex items. It applies that spacing only between items, not on the outer edges. Okay, so you're only applying this gap between items, not around your entire edges of your flex container. So the way that this will work is if you just set a gap of 10 pixels, that's going to be shorthand for setting your row gap and column gap both to 10 pixels. But then you could use gap 10 pixels, 20 pixels, and that's going to set your row gap to 10 pixels and your column gap to 20 pixels. But you could also explicitly say row hyphen gap to set your row gap to 10 pixels, or column hyphen gap to give an explicit value for your column gap. And in these examples here, you can see gap 10 pixels just places these items 10 pixels apart here. Gap 30 pixels Well, that's going to give you 30 pixels of row and column gap. So you have 30 pixels between these different columns here, as well as between these rows. And then gap 10 pixels, 30 pixels is going to be 10 pixels between your rows here and 30 pixels between your columns. All right, so that is a good way to set a little bit of spacing between your different flex items, okay? So those are the properties to control your container and how your items are kind of set up across your container. I know that was probably a lot, but hopefully you learned something. And in our next video, we will cover how the children property set and what specific properties you can set on your flex children.